Welcome to Dope Wisdom. Come on. Intellectual spiritualism, life and recovery. And I'm your host, Yeshaia Blakeney. Enjoy.
All right. Welcome to the first official episode of the Dope Wisdom podcast. We are here with Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Finley.
Exactly how I like it phrased.
So when I describe you to other people to get them intrigued, because I often send people to meet you so that you can impact their lives and they can hear what you have to say and kind of see who you are to influence their life in a good way. I usually take a few bits of who you are and put them together because they're an interesting mix that we don't see much. So I'll say things like, he's a Hasidic, Kabbalistic, or Neo-Hasidic rabbi. He's a Marine. He is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He does spiritual psychology. He is a doctor in philosophy and ethics and religion, social ethics and religion.
Religion-social ethics.
Religion-social ethics. He is impeccable about the order of things and how to say them.
I like language to be precise. It actually helps through many of the thicket of life. Precise language is the sharpest instrument for cutting through the thicket of life.
Amazing. He's a father.
Father for fine children.
Husband,
grandfather.
Leader of a congregation.
I am, yes.
He's a group facilitator at Recover Integrity.
One of my happiest times is leading group here at Recover Integrity.
A spiritual counselor.
I do that too.
What else?
Well, I love reading Greek philosophy. I'm in love with philosophy, and I'm in love with military history, different epics depending on my interest at a given time.
Beautiful. We label the group you run here, Recover Integrity, Hold the Line. You want to explain it?
Oftentimes when I counsel people with what I call the wisdom and virtue method, which doesn't adequately describe my teaching, but it's a little bit closer than spiritual psychology. And because spiritual psychology, oftentimes people think of spiritual as spontaneity, connecting with the divine, being filled with the divine presence, which is part of spirituality.
Yeah.
But for me, spirituality starts with the idea that we govern our lives by spirit, but especially the ego self and the destructive patterns of the ego self. So to adequately practice spiritual psychology, there has to be something of a warrior spirit, because the destructive patterns in the ego self can be so tenacious and so injurious to one's own life and other people that unless you see it with a kind of a warrior identity, things slip right by us. So I oftentimes will counsel people about anger, depression, those kinds of things. They describe their feelings. At a certain point, I say, it's your duty not to yell at your wife or kids. It's your duty not to fall into depression because you abandon people who love you, depend on you. A rabbi, and they tell me all these things that they feel. And I say, you got to hold the line. Because sometimes what's happening is as if it's a crashing wave that wants to submerge you, and there's a wall. And if that wall crumbles, you're gonna drown in your anger, your depression, whatever's coming. So you gotta build a wall and hold that line. When the wave goes down, you can repair the wall. But if you can't hold the line against negative thoughts, feelings, emotions, etc., you'll never grow spiritually. So oftentimes when I'm counseling a person, we get to what I call the moment when. And it's I take an image from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when you're working on, for example, escaping a back control, which is one of the worst places you can be. I mean, if you're in a fight, they can beat you to death, and if you're doing Jiu-Jitsu, they can render you unconscious. And there's a certain point where the way you're working with their grip comes down to centimeters. And a person says, but I can't take his grip off, and I can't do this. And I will say to the person I'm working with, that's where the fight is. Mm-hmm. Your entire life has come down to now whether you can move his finger and thumb 1 centimeter. That's all your life has come down to at this point. Put everything into that.
Yeah.
And let's see what comes up.
Yeah.
So what I've discovered is in spiritual growth, life sometimes comes down to precise moments where everything's at stake. And if you can hold the line right there, sometimes there can be a cascade of other things that come.
Yeah.
So that image of this moment is the moment for you to hold the line. And if you can't hold the line, you've got to start over. And if you can hold the line, we can move forward. So that's an image I've had for many years, also from the military. Hold the line or die, because there's nothing back there that's going to save us. So either we hold the line or we get run over and killed. So,
are you able to identify moments in your life that were that centimeter, where you had to hold the line that defined some major transformation? Or
yeah, I mean, I'll just, because I'd rather talk about the mundane. For example, when I decided never to raise my voice at my children. Now and then I allowed myself to be angry and so forth, and I decided, well, I'm done with that. And I made a very deep decision. And then a moment came up, and I don't even have to be aware that I'm raising my voice, because I have a strong personality, and I can just have a certain energy that can scare a little kid.
Sure.
So my youngest was about 7, and and I really taught them how to confront their parents. And she comes to me, she says, Daddy, she says, I know you're never going to hurt me, but you are sometimes scary for me. Mm-hmm. I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I felt profoundly apologetic. And she said, so I need to know whether you are seriously angry or just kind of not conscious of what you're doing.
Whoa.
I said, okay. She says, I laughed and think about it. She said, here's what I want you to do. When you really are upset, you have to hold your little finger up.
Yeah. That'll calm you down.
It's
hard to be furious with your pinky.
She said, Daddy, if you're really upset, please hold your pinky up.
Brilliant.
Brilliant?
Yeah, brilliant.
I said, okay, you got it.
Yeah.
And, so my wife and kids have been my biggest teachers, because I would say, okay, I can have anger, I will not express it. Yeah. And if I do, I apologize. There's no excuse. Yeah. And then someone say, you sound angry. Yeah. And I say, I apologize. So those are moments in my growth as a husband and as a father, where I announced my path, and I asked my family to hold me to it.
Yeah, I did a similar thing. I have 2 questions. I'm going to say those first, and then I don't want to forget them. One of them is, what do you think was happening with you prior to that, psychologically, let's say, that you didn't have that kind of clarity, or the commitment wasn't there, number one. And then number 2, I want to know the positive effects that you had once you were able to hold that wall of virtue around ego. Did it have systemic effects in your emotional, spiritual life that you experienced in one of those? And before you answer those, I just know if I didn't say it, I might forget.
Sure.
I remembered, early on in my 20s with my kids, I would lose my temper and I'd raise my voice. And the shame that I would feel, and more importantly, the impact that was having on my children, was unbearable for me. But I couldn't stop it. I couldn't hold the line, or at least looking back historically, I knew it. I was ashamed of it, but I didn't seem to be able to control it. And I created a sign, and I put it on their door that said, "No angry dads allowed." And I said, if you ever feel I'm over, that was my line. Just walk into your room or point to the side. So it worked everywhere except for the car.
Yeah.
I was making them do the work, because I couldn't do it myself. Yeah. But it was the same thing. It's like, creating ways to kind of hold yourself accountable to the vision of who you want to be. It's so hard.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't even, I never saw myself as an angry person. But when I began studying Musar at about age 30, roughly.
And you have to explain Musar.
Musar is a body of literature that discusses virtues and flaws, oftentimes rooting it in biblical and rabbinic sources. So if you pick up a book of Musar, it'll give you 10 virtues, 10 flaws in reference to the Bible and the Talmud.
Sure.
Musar in modern Hebrew means moral, but etymologically means one who has turned away. So it's the practice of turning away from flaws and turning toward the good. So as I began to study Musar, and I was looking at, I'd never really studied flaws and good qualities. I studied the idea of character, but not the specifics. And as I went through it, I realized I don't measure up to any of these.
Yeah.
And I also had a few really good people in my life that pointed things out and said, Finley, you ought to be operating at a higher level. This doesn't befit you.
Yeah. Wow.
And, luckily, my elder son was 5. My younger was about 3. And I began looking at myself, and that was the point in my life when I decided to try to become a virtuous person.
Yeah.
And then I learned, I discovered the works of the great psychologist William Glasser, and then Albert Ellis. And I realized that there's actually a psychological method for becoming virtuous. And all that was in my late 20s, early 30s, and that laid the foundation for everything that came next.
And so would you say that you just weren't conscious of it, or you hadn't constructed it in that way until you were around 30, then you began to? And then what was going on between when you began to conceptualize, let's call them being virtuous, and character defects or assets, or however you frame it, between that time when you became conscious of it and the revelation with your daughter?
Oh, so I was already working the path way before she was born, but I still had a strong voice. I still could marshal up.
Got it.
This is really wrong, kind of.
Yeah.
And she said, you can't even do that. You can't even have a strong voice. So anger was basically done.
Yeah.
But not the consciousness that I can be scary.
Got it. Wow, that's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so the second question was then, once you began to get on this path, once you began to hold the line, have a wall of virtue, how has your internal life experience changed? I mean, aside from the fact that you're a better person in the world because of that, which is a huge deal, but internally, what's been the experience?
Yeah. So the wall of virtue is a term that I came up with to describe the kinds of inner life experiences that came out of studying William Glasser, Albert Ellis, and the Jewish moral psychological discipline. It goes something like this. All anger, frustration, and depression, according to William Glasser, is from not having a need met. So he would teach, when one is angry, frustrated, resentful, depressed, don't look on what other people did or didn't do. Look on the nature of what you needed. So then you examine the need. Now, to do that, you have to go to a higher level of consciousness. You have to be able to see what's happening in the ego self.
Yeah.
So a very common phrase, if you can identify it, you can disidentify from it. So instead of being the anger, you have anger.
You observe it.
Yeah, you observe it. So I learned how to do that from practicing what I was studying. So then I would say, is the need, can I clearly articulate the inner need? Is my need moral? Okay. Now, my greatest moral violation was needing people to agree with me. And I would look at myself in the classroom, for example, graduate seminars, when somebody believed something stupid, I was an avenging angel of God to straighten people out.
Yeah, got it.
And I thought, wow, that's really bad.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my professors said, that's not nice. He said it differently, but that's kind of what it was. I said, wow, it's not moral. It's kind of fascist to need people to agree with you.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So that I got that right away.
Yeah.
That's not moral.
Yeah.
And then, is it rational?
And so what did you do with it? Okay, so it's not moral, but you still have that drive. Or is it once you became aware of it?
I basically said, I looked at my need. It's not a moral need. Therefore, do not act on it.
Yeah.
Okay, now what would that mean? So I would have to. I'll give the example. When I was in graduate school, I think maybe even taking one of these classes, a rabbi drove in from an outlying area of greater Los Angeles, congregational rabbi, about a 50-mile drive to attend this class. And he was probably in his 40s or 50s, not trained at the level that we were operating. And he would say like rabbi things, the kinds of things that let's hope it works out for the best. And every person, just kind of bromides, little spiritual things that actually upon scrutiny just can't hold up.
Yeah.
So I would kind of pin him on it. I said, what do you mean by that? And I would push. And he'd get flustered because he actually never had a second thought about some of the stuff he would say.
Sure.
So the professor brought me down to his office one day. He said, I want you to understand, this class is all he has. He's in a kind of a third-rate congregation out in a third-rate city, drives here. This is his glory day.
Sure.
And you're making his life hell.
Yeah.
So just need to know that, didn't you?
Yeah.
Right? And you're better than that.
Yeah. Wow.
So I thought, wow, I'm that guy.
Yeah.
Now, that was one of the greatest gifts I ever had, was that professor trusted me that he could just say it to me and that I would take it to heart and act on it.
Yeah.
So then in class, I reframed him from being lazy thinker to a man who's starving for some intellectual stimulation and has come here to do it. And I'm one of his compatriots, and I have to be of service to him.
That's so.
So I reframed how I saw it.
Well, and also just it's reframing, meaning changing your perspective. Both were true, possibly. Meaning he's somebody who had not challenged and scrutinized his own thinking, but it was irrelevant for the moral person that you want to be in the world.
Correct.
And the impact you want to have on people.
Correct. Yeah. So the facts stayed the same. And I say this to people. They said, what theory should I have? Meaning, what frame should I have? I said, within the evidence, what produces the most good?
Yeah.
So often as people describe a situation, I say, if you see it one way, you'll do one thing.
Yeah.
The same facts can sustain a different theory and do another thing.
Sure.
And they say, how do I choose? I said, that which creates the most good. Yeah. And they say, well, what's the most good? The one that does the least harm.
Yeah.
So there's actually a theory here. And oftentimes, just say, not too long ago, I had a counseling session with a husband and wife who were actually getting ready to quit, to throw it in. And as I heard them talking, I asked the husband, why do you think it is that you correct your wife so much? He said, because I want to help her. I said, okay. So now I want you to kind of go to this side.
I already don't believe it.
I want to help her. I said, okay, so go to your frame, like your kind of inner take on her.
Yeah.
Hard for him to get there. I said, look, I'm going to cut our work about 6 months short and just give you the answer.
Yeah.
You think you're better than she is. You think she needs solving, and you're the guy to do it.
Yeah.
You look down on her. He says, well, that's not what I'm thinking. I say, I know it's not what you're thinking. But you don't keep interrupting people to tell them, what's up and how to do it and straighten them out. Yeah. I said, I want you to try imagining what it would be like to look at your wife with reverence. Yeah. That when she needs to tell a story, she doesn't want to be interrupted about how badly she handled things. Just try to imagine. I revere this woman as she's telling me something about her life. Yeah. And if I have suggestions, I'll ask at a different time, and I'll ask permission first. Yeah. And the wife burst out crying. He looked and just kind of like a stunned look on his face. No one ever told him that's what's up with marriage. So, I just like the frame of how you see people. There's a cascade of effects. So I think what happened with me, once you stop acting on needs that produce frustration, anger, and resentment, and you go through the inner work of analyzing your needs, and then once you remove them, and you come back in the world with a different frame of people, there's a cascade effect on what happens next.
Yeah. The thought that came to me around the relationship stuff is I think that there is, for lack of a better term, a sort of a power struggle that happens. The ego self gets triggered, in relationships because there's intimacy and there's closeness and there's difference. You know, people are different in their strengths and areas where they struggle, and you're trying to come together in some form of partnership. And so couples, and I definitely fall in this category, fall into that ego mind of this person is, you know, XYZ in this area, and that's so frustrating, and why are you so, right? And then there's a back and forth. There's this sort of war. And I've always felt that underneath, people are also trying to figure out the really difficult question of how they genuinely feel. And I wonder if that matters or not, but I think, you know, more so in an intimate relationship, there's the analysis of, is this relationship working, and is this the person for me? Now, that's not happening when things are going well, but that's definitely happening in times of stress, particularly the beginning of a relationship prior to a major commitment. And so how do you navigate between trying to reframe seeing something as good, whether it be an intimate relationship or a job, for instance, meaning reframing it in a way that makes it most palatable for you, or even to see the best of it, and still scrutinize how you're really interfacing or feeling about these relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would start by saying feelings are facts, even though they don't determine facts. So there are many people who think because I feel something, it must be factual.
Yes.
And that's not true.
Yes.
But on the other hand, feelings are facts. They actually exist.
They're data.
They're data. So what I say, and the second thing I'll say is, and this is a series of thoughts, but the second one is my feelings are facts, and not one of them is genuine until I get there. There is no genuine feeling.
Got it. My feelings are facts. Got it. So the happening of the feeling is a reality.
Correct.
Then there's lots of narrative, thought, and story that we pile on top and abstract out from our feelings and make judgments, decisions, views, etc.
Yes, and narratives that produce the feelings. So every
produce or reinforce.
Yeah, so feelings are embedded in a narrative, produce a narrative and action. So they're artifacts that sit in the middle of something.
Yeah.
So they're not genuine or not genuine until I arrive at that conclusion.
They are. That's brilliant.
Yeah, they're not. So if I have a feeling, I say to myself, okay, the feeling's real. It may be inauthentic. Now, by this I mean a deep kind of Heideggerian authenticity, which is a sense that you're bringing yourself into the world as someone who cares.
You got to explain it to me again, because I want to understand.
Yeah.
Your feelings are real.
They're real.
There's a question of their authenticity.
Correct.
And by that, you mean in the Heideggerian sense.
And I'm working, it's not easy to get there.
Yeah, no, I can't.
That I'm coming into this world as someone who cares. So what does that require of me? It requires honesty to myself. It requires virtue. And it requires accurately understanding the situation. So all of the things that are required to examine a feeling, I mean, they're actually quite deep. And oftentimes, they take you to the deepest parts of yourself.
Yeah. And it's incredibly challenging.
It's profoundly challenging, and that's where life is.
Do you think that, I mean, as I'm listening to you speak, I'm a visionary thinker, so I'm envisioning passing feelings, you know, it's a way for me to understand them. Do you think that there's the feeling and there's the interpretation or labeling of a feeling, which is obviously never wholly accurate. It's obviously pointing to an inner phenomenon, right? And so do you think that somewhere in there where we get into trouble, I guess what I'm trying to get at is interpretation of an inner phenomenon has so much choice in it because it's multivalent, I guess you'd call it. And so it leads me to the same issue, which is there's multiple things happening in a feeling.
Correct.
And what interpretation I choose to emphasize when having a feeling usually is based on maybe some agenda, not the feeling itself.
Correct.
And so it puts me back in the challenge of I'm in a job I hate. I feel resentment towards it. I have judgment towards my bosses, which is, I think, quite common, or the structure, or all of the imperfections of this organization. I have fantasies about how I could do it so much better. But I'm a thoughtful person, and so I'm thinking, maybe this is just my stuff, and I need to kind of work on my resentment, and every job is imperfect. And what is it for you? How is it that you come to some conclusion or decision?
Yeah, so it is complex, and this is a skill that I try to practice and teach. Is one of the aspects of what I call truth. So there's empirical truth, verifiable truth, and metaphysical truth. I call this the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is you're in a situation, and you have to extract yourself as the focus of the action. That this is my drama.
You have to pull yourself out?
Yeah, I'm not the protagonist.
So I mean I have to pull myself out.
Yeah, I'm on the stage of a play that's not about me.
Okay.
So I, as protagonist, don't have to see this in my terms. So first of all, assume I actually don't know what this play is about.
Yeah.
I just know that I'm in it.
Yeah. Well.
Okay. So I'm no longer the center of action.
Yeah.
Now, it might be about me.
Yeah.
But it might not be about me.
Yeah.
So then I try to look at all the different stakeholders, all the different players, and I entertain the notion, what if this is about somebody else? Mm. And I'm in their play to advance their needs. What if my life is not about me?
I think we call it a tall order.
Yeah, but it's a fascinating reframing.
We do it with our children if we're doing a decent job.
Yeah. So oftentimes I will be in a situation where I'll say to myself, what if at this moment my life is not about me?
Yeah.
What if it's their day?
Yeah.
And then you start to, go through this part of the wisdom practice, which is try to infer from what we know about people and human nature in general and processes of life, where that person's at.
Yeah.
So if I don't like my job, it might be because of the boss and other people.
Yeah.
And then instead of focusing, I'm hurt, I'm frustrated, I don't like it, I try to get into the mind of another person and try to see how they see the world.
Yeah.
And I might find out that I threaten them, or I'm not doing my job competently, or I don't really understand what they want out of me.
Yeah.
So many people are clueless about their jobs.
Yeah.
Because they actually never try to empathetically go into the consciousness of other people around them. I'll give you one very brief example. I have a highly competent person who joined a practice and was on the verge of getting fired.
Who joined a practice?
Let's say professional practice.
Okay.
Doctor, lawyer, dentist kind of thing. He's on the verge of getting fired. He didn't understand why.
Yeah.
So I said, walk me through your first week as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
It turns out he was a bit demeaning to the office manager.
Oh, yeah, bad move.
Yeah, support staff.
Yeah, sure.
I said, you understand that's one of the worst things you can possibly do.
Sure.
In the military, it's like turning the platoon sergeant against the officer in charge of the platoon.
Yeah, bad move.
You might be a 25-year-old lieutenant, take over a platoon.
Sure.
But if you mess with the platoon sergeant, who's probably maybe 15, 20 years in,
yeah,
bad mistake. She's a platoon sergeant.
Yeah.
You don't get on her best. You get on her good side.
Yeah.
I said, it doesn't matter how skilled you are.
Yeah.
You're in a practice. You're no longer by yourself. Yeah. And I said, now get into her mind. Very difficult for him.
Yeah.
So he had to see she's there every day.
Yeah.
She has these crew. She has these professionals she's trying to serve. It's stressful. She's trying to do a good job. And this new guy comes in and gives her a hard time.
Yeah.
She wants you out. And she probably told the guy in charge, he has to go or I'll be unhappy.
Yeah.
And I gave him the truth.
Yeah.
There are lots of good doctors, dentists, lawyers. Mm-hmm. There are not that many good office managers. So if he has to make a choice between you and her,
sure,
she'll win.
Sure.
And it was a complete fundamental world change for him. And he said, thank you.
I know that person's name in my organization,
yeah.
by the way.
Okay, yeah. So I said, what do I do? I said, you got to get on your good side. You know how to do that? He goes, no. I said, ask your wife.
Yeah.
Your wife's the master of how to get office managers, women office managers on your side. It's it's a thing.
Sure.
And so
my wife is the office administrator.
There you go. Yeah.
So you really can't.
You better.
That, so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, known that since I was in the military. I met platoon sergeants. Anyway, so here's an example where he went in, it's about me.
Yeah.
Not, this is a culture I'm walking into, and I got to be really careful about the fabric of this culture.
I don't know where the landmines are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it helped him reframe, my life's not about me. I'm joining their world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was completely new to him, and I think he became a better person for it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I often reflect on that. And I think intuitively, I'm more of a relational person. And so intuitively, I sense that when I walk into places. I'm always sort of feeling what the formal and informal hierarchies are, where the allegiances are, the dynamics. I remember working my first job in recovery, and a woman came in and was hired at a really high level above people that had been there for 10, 15 years, which almost always makes people feel insecure and they feel threatened. When somebody new comes in, if you've been in a job for a long time, and I kind of pulled her aside and tried to support her and say, hey, there's two things happening here. There's your job and your agenda and your ideas, which are fantastic. And they were. She was motivated, she was bright, and she wanted to move fast and create change. I said, but there's a lot of embedded culture here. This place has existed for 30 years. There's relationships, there's informal hierarchies, and you can't just come in and pile drive through this. It won't work for you. You need to form relationships with people, understand it. And I think she was young, so at the time she didn't understand it, but she came to understand as it became a shit show.
There you go. So this is a case study of what it means to start the path toward authenticity. So I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling scared, and then take a step back and say, what's everybody else up to?
Yeah.
And what I want to be is an agent for the good. I want goodness for everybody here, and I want to be effective in my profession. I want my patients, the people that I'm treating. So there's a whole way of thinking about it, which is actually foreign to most people.
I'm gonna move a little laterally,
Sure.
but in the same vein. I've worked with clients, and I have this in myself as well, who have whittled down their conflict to the existential. Well, they'll say things like, I don't know if I want good. I don't know if I want to live. And those, to me, it's as deep as you go in terms of an argument. You can't, somebody has to say to some degree that they care about living and the good in order for them to transform. So it's the ultimate defense to say, no, I don't care about the good. Or no, I don't care if I live on these different axes. What do you do with somebody, or have you worked with people who were there?
Yeah, I go hardcore because I don't have patience for it.
Yeah.
I say, if you don't understand that as a human being on this lonely ship, that our one of our jobs is to care for the other people on the crew, you're a defect. You got to throw you overboard. We can't carry you.
You do go hardcore.
Yeah, so I said, listen, if we were on a ship, we throw you overboard. You're lucky because we don't, we can't throw you overboard. But I'll tell you what, if you walk through life with that, you're defective. And no one's going to want you. And if you want to live that kind of lonely, abandoned isolation, I said, I don't think you do. I actually think you don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And therefore, you came up with a philosophy that accounts for your behaviors as if you chose this from a point of integrity.
Yeah.
I said, you just have defective thinking, and I can help you.
Yeah.
But you got to know what's up about life. And oftentimes they go, no one ever laid it out to me that I'm a defective. I said, yeah, okay, so how do you know? I said, because I know. Yeah. Well, what makes your thought better than mine? I said, because I'm you. Why are you coming to me? Why are we talking? Am I asking for your advice? You're asking for my advice.
You made me think about when you were speaking Nietzsche, and I go back and forth. I don't go back and forth. I have different perspectives, points of view from which I understand Nietzsche. One, I see him as one of the most penetrating, brilliant question askers that ever took pen to paper. I mean, just poetic, beautiful, truthful, seeking, just cutting. And the other, I see him as somebody that never grew out of adolescence and had some interesting psychological depression, difficulty, despair. So I psychologize him to a degree, but I also revere him. And so I was just wondering, because I think he's sort of one of the kings of existentialism.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on
he and
Nietzsche?
Kierkegaard have had a profound influence on my thinking and continue to. I'm never far from studying either of them. So in literary analysis, we call this the genetic fallacy, which is the worth of an argument is based on where it came from.
Sure.
Okay. So the genetic fallacy would be we should maybe be suspected with Nietzsche's teaching because he was a man who never got out of adolescence.
I don't have that problem.
Yeah, exactly. So one could say that this troubled adolescent had moments of genius, that he far transcended his circumstances. And how do we know? Well, take what he says seriously and see what happens next.
That's right.
And therefore, I, at some level, I am also a philosophical pragmatist, which means that which is true is that which works. So if at some level, if I apply his idea to my, as I understand them, to my life and life of others, and it produces good, then at least the way that I'm understanding them, they have truth substance to them.
And you experience that daily navigation of life.
Correct. So life is always going to be the judge of what's true, to some level.
I have tons of questions that I wrote down that I want to get to.
Okay.
One that comes to mind that's on the list is around, let's call it culture. Let's call it in the West. Let's speak a little more specifically. We're on the West Coast, LA. So, touching on all of that, but focused on our center. What do you think are the most common cultural fallacies and belief systems that we suffer from today? I mean, just that you come across all of the time that we are sort of seeped in, that we don't question.
I see so much evidence of one, it's a fallacy, but something people skip, which is human nature. So I like to think of evolutionary psychology when I think of human nature. That we used to be in large tribes, bands, or villages of maybe maximum 200 or 300 adults, and then children and old people. People naturally doing something gainful for the good of the group. Or if one was incompetent, they found something for you to do.
Okay.
And so the idea that we should go to high school when we're 14, when actually if human nature is 200,000 years old, for 198,000 of 2,000 years, people didn't go to high school. They didn't go out and get a job. They didn't go out and get married. So the idea that you are, instead of learning to do what's for the good of that small group, you're put in something called high school with thousands of other adolescents. Instead of, let's say for a young man, you're put in the hunting group, and you're the junior person of a bunch of adults who are showing you what's up and how to be. And we're expecting adolescents to solve that on their own, and teachers not teaching anything, which is what they need to know, which is how to solve life's problems. So we made up this thing called the curriculum, which is completely artificial. They're not taught how to think. And then get a job. Nobody used to have to look for a job. It's artificial. Get married and move into a box, either a small box called an apartment or a bigger box called a house. But you're going to move into a box, seal yourself out from everybody else, and with no help from all the generations and all the village, raise kids to be happy, successful people. The whole thing is based on a profound fallacy. So the minute
that human nature is,
that we're doing something that our problems are because my kid doesn't go to high school or my marriage isn't working. Like now that we're going to take this aberration of human nature as a starting point, look at all of our problems, as opposed to the problem of what do we do with the fact that none of this accords with human nature? Okay, now start there.
Sure.
So when a parent says, my kid's in high school not doing their homework. I said, what is your son genetically programmed to do? 198,000 years of programming.
Yeah.
What's your son genetically programmed to do at 14? Do interesting things of valor.
Yeah.
Be challenged to his core.
Yeah.
Understanding what it means to support the group.
Yeah.
That's what 14-year-olds are supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
That's why at some point, the compliant kids say, okay, I'm going to school all day.
Yeah.
The non-compliant kids say, where's the action?
Yeah.
And where's the action? Oftentimes it's around drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
So they say, my kid's bad. And I say, no, culture's bad.
Yeah.
Now, we can't reverse this thing, but we can definitely try to understand problems in terms of human nature. That's a starting point. Anytime I'm presented with a problem, I ask myself, what's human nature?
Yeah.
And now let me understand this problem in terms of human nature.
It brings to mind for me two, I think, general problems, historical problems that I've thought about. One of them has to do with the notion of progress. And so it seems to me that, and I would understand why this is, that as soon as humans could self-reflect, be aware of their own mortality, observe themselves, observe what's around them, articulate it, there was a notion of things getting better. You can imagine the future, right? And as human beings became more organized, they created systems which got better at it, and it created this idea that we can progress, we can overcome our circumstances, which I think in the beginning had to do with farming and nature and disease, and then became technology and transportation and somewhere borderlining needs and wants. And it took on a real life of its own, this idea of progress. And so when I think about the way that we've institutionalized and urbanized our world, now our global world, I think it's all been under this notion of progress, whether we're doing it that consciously or not, which I'm not so sure of. And that the challenge that we face is there seems to be some conflict between at least how we're going about defining progress and going about the execution of that, and our nature, what feels right, harmony, those kinds of notions. Do you?
Sure. Yeah. So I try to have a very wide perspective on this. So one thing that's come with progress, we'll say, is comforts of life are far more available, and I'm all in favor of life being comfortable. Medicine is a great advancement. At least in the Western and much of the world, the capacity for freedom and mobility.
Yeah.
So I love Steven Pinker's work because everybody thinks the world's getting worse, and Steven Pinker pulls back and says everything is so much better than it ever was.
Yeah.
So
in terms of violence, primarily.
It's in violence, but you might say all kinds of other things aside from people's opinion of themselves, because people always think things are getting worse. Sure. So let's start by, I'm thinking of my little tribe now.
Yeah.
Now they have human equality between men and women.
Yes.
They don't have slaves.
Yes.
They don't mistreat their children.
Yes.
They are warm at night. And they have smartphones.
Yeah.
Okay. Which means when someone goes out on a life journey, they can call them.
Yes.
So there's nothing wrong with progress.
Yeah.
What's always wrong is human beings.
Yeah.
Human beings go wrong.
Yeah. Oh, I lost it. I was getting it to a place where I know that I always wrestle with it.
Okay. Well, we were talking about the idea of progress.
I was saying Steven Pinker, Angels of Our Better Nature, I think is the book.
Right.
I remember. So one of my theories around some idea of, let's call it equality of opportunity. I don't want to get into the equality of opportunity and outcome. Things getting better in general, more fairness, whatever that means, etc. When I talk to people who get very self-righteous and angry about the lack of fairness, and whether that is racial or gender or socioeconomic, one of the things that I feel is it was so much easier to make progress around fairness and equality, however we define those things, when the targets were clear.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, in the civil rights movement or the feminist movement, the right to vote, these kinds of things, you knew exactly what you needed to do. We need to change the law.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And that now people have a sense of systemic injustice. I surely do. But it's very difficult to define. There's entirely not enough and too much information to go through. And what to do about it is so challenging. And so sometimes I know when I've spoken with you, I'm like, well, don't you see the amount of inequality and this and that, and that the race stuff still exists, et cetera, et cetera. We've had interesting conversations about it. But what I go back to myself is, yeah, I do sense all of that. It becomes difficult to articulate, and it becomes difficult to say what to do about it. And so how do you feel, because I know that things aren't, I know you don't believe things are fair, or that, resources are distributed in some, perfect way or anything like that. How do we go about trying to change things at a societal level when the things we're aiming at are not solid? They're not laws. They're not,
Yeah. So we completely agree on the dearth of justice of every form. Let's say procedural courtroom justice, distributive justice, justice as fairness, restorative justice.
Sure.
In every single level, there's not enough justice.
Yes.
Social justice.
Sure.
The Constitution wants us to establish justice.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's not enough.
Yeah.
So to think well, so now we're going to think about the injustice in a given area.
Sure.
The first thing is to think well.
Yeah.
And most people don't think well. So I'm saying, so where do I fit in all this?
Yeah.
So I have a friend who's very interested in racial justice in the court system.
Sure.
Okay. And he likes to talk about it with me because I think well.
Yeah.
And I'm not part of an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And therefore he knows that I have the same goals as he does. I have what I would call progressive values.
Sure.
I want freedom. I want equality. I want prosperity distributed much better. So I call myself a political progressive in every way imaginable. But if you want goals, you will have to think well. And I have a sense that some people say, because my goals are good, I automatically think well.
Yes, that's not true.
And that's my big problem is I share your goals. So therefore, when I start to ask them to think well, they think, oh, you disagree.
Yeah.
So I would like everybody to have quality health care. Sure. Someone says, well, what do you think about Obamacare? So I have some questions. Oh, so you don't want universal health care? I said, I absolutely do. Yeah. But I have some questions if this is the most efficient way to get it. Yeah. So the problem is when you want people to think well, they get upset and they think you disagree with their goals when I'm just disagreeing with how they're thinking.
Yes. You changed more. I mean, it's amazing that a person could go through their whole life with a certain set of political beliefs. And I was young, but I was still a thinking person, and never have it challenged in a way. And I think it actually speaks to the poor job that people do of communicating with each other in general when it comes to values and matters of huge import socially. You changed 2 long-held beliefs in probably 4 sentences.
Okay, can't wait.
One of them was really simple. I was born and raised in Berkeley, Ralph Naderian person, and what attracted me was the values. I was like, yes, more for the poor, less for the rich, more for the sick, less for the, it was just classic.
Right on.
I was raised like that.
Yeah.
And the Ralph Naders of the world, the Bernie Sanders of the world, they were speaking that. They speak that. And I was like, yes, yes, yes. And I never thought about what it takes to get there. And there was never conversation about it. Like, well, will that actually work? I mean, so like Bernie Sanders. I love everything Bernie Sanders says. And I think he lives with integrity. I mean, I love the fact that he's one of the only politicians you could point out that ain't worth $10 million, or $100 million or $1 billion. And that he seems to care, and it is genuine. And basically a lot of his campaign was, free education, cutting taxes for the middle class, raising taxes on the rich, and, I'm sure he's probably pretty anti-military spending, and we could go down the line. And for me, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Good for the good, bad for the bad. I'm not pro-violence. And then if I, stop and go, well, where is that going to come from? Mm-hmm. How is that going to work? How is that going to play out? He never spoke about it. And so where you challenged me was pointing out that there's a difference between your values and what you want to have happen, and then the belief of what's actually going to work. What kind of systems do we need in place? What kind of personalities do we need in place? What kind of management? What kind of timelines? All of the reality of executing any kind of vision. And I realize that so clearly now because I try to manage my own family in this organization that I co-founded, and how difficult it is. It's easy to have a good vision. It is such a challenge to execute. And there are so many compromises along the way in such a small family unit, let alone 300 million people. So in that area, and then my opinion of the military, which my only opinion of the military is, we shouldn't have one. We should be the first to give away, disarm completely and show the world that we can, turn. And you said, Shai, who do you think are the top 3 world powers? And I said, United States, Russia, and China. Some way, shape, or form. And you said, of those 3 empires, who would you want to be the most powerful? I said, the United States.
Good answer.
And he said, so do you think that here's how you put it. He said, do you think that in history, these powerful countries are not fighting to be the most dominant? And that if one of them disarmed, that the other 2 would give up their pursuit? Something like that. You were much more succinct, but that was your point. And I don't think they do. And immediately, I remember we were in a classroom after class. I remember going, my God, I've held this belief about the military without ever scrutinizing it. And it also stopped me from being able to be grateful for the United States.
Yeah.
And I have huge critiques of the United States, as I'm sure you do.
As do I.
Yeah. But just so much confusion comes from people not being able to communicate behind their particular value or feeling.
Yes. That's a good point. So my feelings about the military, for example, say military spending.
Yeah.
As a student of military history, one part of history that haunts me, number one, is Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
That we really didn't understand something was out to get us.
Yeah.
You may not want someone to come out to get you.
Yeah.
But your desire not to be seen as a target does not make you not a target.
Yeah. So
from Roosevelt on down, we were asleep at the wheel, except for a few people who were called alarmists and militarists.
Got it.
Now, after World War II, with the use of the atomic weapons, the United States seriously cut defense spending, put everything in nuclear weapons and so forth.
Yeah.
And when the North Koreans invaded South Korea, we sent over a military that was untrained, underfunded, had inferior weapons.
Yeah.
And we sent these young men to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
So if you're going to cut military spending, don't send in the military.
Yeah.
Because you're sending good people to their inevitable deaths. Right. So therefore, if we don't want Russia, China, whoever else to be the world power, we have to make sure. Now, is there going to be waste? Yes. Everything has waste.
Sure.
So we should cut the waste, and we should make the military, lean, mean, and only have the right weapons for the right kinds of engagements. But I'm not pro-military. I'm pro-life. I don't want to see young people sent on a noble mission to be slaughtered because we decide not to spend the money, or spend or train them.
Sure.
So that's my deeper thing about this. Is just as you said, if we recede countries that are actually fascist. You can call America fascist until you live in China. Then you know what fascism is. Yeah. You can call us corrupt and go live in Russia. That's corruption. Yeah. Okay. Who's going to be the leader of the Middle East? Is it going to be Turkey? Is it going to be Syria, Iran? Or are we going to kind of hang in there? Yeah. People say, I don't want the world. Let's be the world's policeman. I said, okay, so who is? Who do you want Iran to be the world policeman? You want Turkey? You want Saudi Arabia? You want Israel? Who do you want to be the world's policeman? Well, it shouldn't be us. I said, okay, you've made a conclusion. Yeah. But we haven't actually gone through the argument. Yeah. So what I find is sometimes when I announce my conclusion, people assume that it's just doctrinaire, as opposed to a position I've come at with a lot of careful reasoning, I think a profound knowledge of history and human nature. So I call myself a person with progressive values, but understanding how things work. I'll give you one little example. So when Bernie Sanders says free college education, the first thing I said was, nothing is free.
Sure.
It just means you don't pay for it.
Yeah.
Somebody else pays for it.
Sure.
Okay, so any solution that has to do with somebody else paying for it, it just sets off an alarm for me. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen.
Sure.
But I get an alarm bell when anybody ever says free.
Yeah.
Just say, somebody else will pay for your education.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The second thing is, I need to explain to me how, if everybody has a college education, how that translates into jobs.
Yeah.
Because there are many folks with college educations that can't get jobs because they majored in ethnomusicology or something, right? So since you're using my money as a taxpayer, do I get to decide what people should learn? You say, oh, no. I said, okay, but that I actually think
if I'm paying for it,
and we're
like your kids.
If I'm paying for it, I should have some say in how my money's spent. Okay, now, I might be wrong, but I like to be proven to be wrong than just say that I'm wrong. So whenever I hear free and global solution, I want full employment, high productivity, and better distributed wealth. But when someone says free college education, I thought either he's not a thoughtful man, which I don't believe, or he knows to get elected, you have to actually give a thoughtless position because you're actually campaigning to relatively thoughtless people. So for a good guy to get elected, he has to say things that are rhetorically interesting and leave it to other people to say, okay, well, now that you're elected, we actually break this down.
Here's where we got to come.
Here's what we got to do. So that's for me the nature of my political thinking is I think my values are very clearly on progressive. I just need to know what's going to actually work within the limitations of human nature.
I got to tell you, this is an interesting story. I don't think I've ever told you before. And I hope I have the facts right. I think I do. But it's a secondhand story for folks. When Ronald Reagan was governor, he and a lot of the conservatives were attempting to pass a bill to incentivize fathers to show up for the raising of their kid with the mother, because there was this huge welfare issue and this issue around, from a conservative point of view, the family unit being dysfunctional. We can't solve this problem until the families are more functional and dads are showing up to raise their kids, largely in the ghettos, et cetera, et cetera. So they tried to pass a bill, which from the conservative point of view was incentivizing dads to show up. How did they do it? They said, if the dad is not available to sign the birth certificate and claim legal rights to this child, the mother is not eligible for welfare. And when I tell people this story, they're horrified by that. Most of my, I'm in Los Angeles, most of my friends are liberal, and this is evil. I said, well, I don't like it. I mean, I'll tell you that for pragmatic reasons. But it gives you a mind into something that crosses that line between progressive and conservative. Meaning the conservatives are really genuinely trying to figure out how to get families to be the center of values, to get people to become more responsible and take care of themselves, because they believe that's the only way that we're going to solve these problems, which I agree with. You know, the government cannot solve our responsibility problems, right? On the other hand, if you potentially cut that spending, you're going to have a lot of single mothers who already don't have any resources. They now don't have social welfare.
Correct. Yes.
So my parents fill up a bus full of pregnant women and drive up to Sacramento. They march them in and they squash the bill. Then they get a call from Governor Reagan's office offering them a job. You'd like to come work for us on welfare.
Wow.
Isn't that true?
That's a trip. That's great. Beautiful story. Yeah.
I don't even know how much time we have, and I got to nothing that I wanted to
All right.
discuss. But if you have some more time.
Yeah, sure.
You know, let's see where we're at.
Yeah, let's take another 20 minutes.
All right. And I'll be laser. Okay, we'll do the easy ones. What is the nature of reality?
I'm a Kantian when it comes to that, meaning there is something beyond me, but I can only perceive it through my faculties of perception. So the five senses, obviously, and my capacity to conceptualize, interpret facts. So this would be called a phenomenology. So what really is reality en sich, as it is to itself, we don't have access to it. What we do have is phenomenologically building interpretations of reality in which we can function. So I'm more or less a pragmatist in the William James, John Dewey tradition.
Okay, and if you were to take a guess beyond what you could rationally hold on to, intuitively, when you have a sense of the nature of reality, you have a vision beyond that?
Yeah, so phenomenologically, I believe there are things that are metaphysical realities that cannot be empirically described or proven. So, because I experience them. So if you say, do I believe that something exists that I haven't experienced, that somebody else has experienced? Give it a try. That's why I'm not closed-minded. People say, do I believe in, witches and goblins? I say, well, show me the guy who does, and let me talk to him. So I believe there's far more out there than we can possibly imagine, but somebody has to have experienced it for us to even know anything about it. And I'd like to quiz this person. So I'm open to this, because I've had mystical experiences, and I believe in metaphysical realities because I've experienced them. So I'm not limited to the empirical world. I'm limited to the world of experience.
And if somebody were to quiz you on your mystical experiences, what would you?
Well, I could describe the couple of mystical experiences I've had, and they might infer what I inferred. I mean, I've had profound experiences. I made inferences from them. And they can say, well, that's not what I would infer from that experience. I said, so what would you infer? Maybe you're right. Maybe I did not infer correctly. So I'm open to being questioned and have my reasoning questioned.
Did you feel those mystical experiences impacted your life in a practical way?
Absolutely. Yeah.
How's that?
In one experience, I went from a deist to a theist, which means there is a conscious God who is conscious of me and who has called me to a purpose. And once I came out with that, some people thought it was weird. And,
were you already a rabbi when that had happened?
A rabbinical student, but a deist, kind of ethical. Judaism as ethical monotheism. So something in the kind of, reform idea, religion is a way to make us ethical and improve society, but never really felt what I'll call the spiritual dimension or the dimension of the holy and the transformative.
As a personal God on something, you say it's conscious of you.
Yeah, conscious of me. Yeah. And so I had read about this. I had a degree in religion, and I was already a couple years in a rabbinical school. So I would say I had the intellectual capacity to understand transformation, and I was actually personally involved in it. But the personal experience grounded me so deeply that there is another reality. It's conscious because it was a personal mystical experience.
You say metaconscious.
Yeah, and metaconscious. Yeah, something beyond our conscious that is conscious of us. And we have personal roles in this. So that put me in what I'll call on the spiritual path. I thought of becoming a professor, and I could have. And people who knew these things about me said, please don't become a professor. You need to work with community and spiritual seekers, and that's going to kill your spirit. So it's had lots of effects on how I've lived my life.
Thank you. I know some of your philosophy, and I think I've probably asked this question in various inadequate forms.
So maybe I'll have a succinct answer.
Maybe. I'm always curious how you put together an experience of a conscious God, metaconscious God, I'll call it God, and a personal God. And much of your philosophy, which is sort of God doesn't interfere or intervene in the lives of man, and doesn't literally answer our prayers necessarily.
Mhm.
And the way I framed it, and I want you to correct me or even go deeper, is sort of this is the practical way for most people to view the world. Because what happens when your prayers aren't answered or God doesn't intervene?
Mhm.
Over here, though, there is this possibility, because this does exist, of a personal God or a prayer being answered or a miracle happening. But practically speaking, let's just talk about this, because, if that happens, great, but, you can't count on it. Or something
Right.
like that is the way that I
Yeah.
frame your...
Yeah, don't rely on prayers being answered.
Yeah. How do you understand a world that works that way? Where prayers could be answered, but,
I don't have a theory.
Yeah.
I don't have enough data to have a theory. And I'm okay living without a theory. It doesn't bother me at all without a theory.
Yeah.
But I will not misinterpret reality.
Yeah.
So if someone says, God did answer your prayer, God just said no.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll say, shut up.
Yeah,
Right? It's just because you want to preserve an idea that you can't actually sustain, justify. So let's say I live in a world in which it is not apparent that there is a God, because the God that I believe in, or that I believe exists, put it that way, does not control human beings in a sense that we are puppets, that we're acting out God's will. In fact, human beings have the capacity to reject our moral nature, our reasoning nature. Let's say we have the capacity to be reasoning moral creatures, and we just reject it. We just decide not to. So we act against God. People say, but you're a rabbi. I say, look at the Bible. The Bible is mostly a history of people rejecting God.
Sure.
So there's nothing surprising for me in the idea that God can't get past human recalcitrance.
Sure.
It's just obvious to me. I don't even understand why it's controversial.
Yeah.
It's so obvious about in the Bible and human nature.
Well, so let's shift it. I think this is interesting. So from your perspective, that personal God, the metaconscious personal God, and its relationship, let's call it, to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you do believe that that's what those religions are pointing towards, the Abrahamic religions.
Yes, and people without religion oftentimes.
Yeah. And then when you look at the Buddhist or Hindu traditions, which frame God in such different language, and even gods and polytheism in the case of Hinduism, or Buddhism in the case of cycles and karma and energy. How do you put those two, in my mind, great traditions, the Abrahamic and the Eastern traditions, together when the language that we describe, the realities we're describing or experiences we're describing, don't seem to necessarily fit together very well?
Yeah. I think anybody who is spiritually enlightened and has capacity for good reasoning does not take metaphysical theory as adequately describing metaphysical reality.
Got it.
So I call myself a Lurianic Kabbalist because the metaphysical myth seems to organize reality in such a way that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So if I meet a Hindu who says, "Well, I have my metaphorical reality," I say, "Well, we talk about it." I say, "Well, we actually live in the same world with a different system of metaphor." That's okay with me.
Yeah.
So, but don't take the symbolic reality that mediates consciousness to the metaphysical realm. Don't take it too seriously.
Yeah. But what do you think are the facts? I mean, it would seem to me that, like, especially with Hinduism, that it's beyond sort of the random development of culture, that I would use to account for those differences, or what I infer of what the heck was going on in Egyptian society. It seems far beyond. It's like, well, there was some pretty serious cultural differences. I mean, to me, it seems that those metaphors connect to metaphysical realities somehow. That there's a relationship between them.
Sure.
They're symbolic, but when you try to look at the relationship between the symbolic metaphoric order, let's call it, of our great tradition, what is their relationship to what lies behind?
Yeah, so when I try to think about it, I think we've had this discussion. It seems that west of the Indus River, monotheism had a very powerful effect ever since the Abrahamic religions came into being. East of the Indus River, you had a stronger residue of polytheism and the movement toward Buddhism, which is in a way erasing theoretical reality.
Yes.
In some ways.
Sure.
So which side of the Indus River are you living on?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was born on the west side of the river.
Yeah.
So I'm in a tradition, Lurianic Kabbalah, that brought mythical polytheism in. I was like, no, we're like, it's the return of the repressed.
Yeah.
So in some way, Lurianic Kabbalah is a polytheistic tradition.
Yeah.
So I understand the
Sphirot.
The Sphirot, exactly.
Yeah.
There are 10
thought about that.
Yeah, there are 10 different instantiations of God.
Yeah.
So if the guy across from the Indus River says, no, there are 10 different gods. I said, no, there are 10 different instantiations of God.
Yeah.
Let's not take our language too seriously.
Yeah.
We might be speaking about something that's fundamentally quite similar. So I remember one time when I had a Hindu friend, and he was making a case that polytheism is a better way for understanding the divine than monotheism. Yeah. I said, let me give it a try. So we have the traditional 19 benedictions in our daily prayer service.
Uh-huh.
So I built in my mind, like a horseshoe of 19 different temples.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I imagined myself going in and worshiping in the temple of the protector of the ancestors.
Yeah.
So I did a circuit of 19 different temples.
Yeah.
And I went to him and I said, thank you.
Yeah.
I became a polytheist for about a month.
Yeah.
And that I worship 19 different gods.
Wow. Wow.
And there's one monotheistic mystical God behind me.
Yeah.
So he schooled me.
Yeah, beautiful.
He schooled me.
Beautiful.
So that's why I say, tell me what the metaphoric system you live in. Does it help mediate your conscience between that and God? And does it create a view and ethical personality?
Yeah.
And does it inform your life journey and make you an authentic human being? Yeah. Meets all those criteria. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. So
that's my kind of metaphysical. It's not just tolerance. It's like I just want to know. Give me your mystery.
Yeah.
I'm not tolerant. I'm hugely curious about other people's mysteries because that's going to help fill in my mystery.
Yeah. All right.
One more.
Only one?
Okay.
Listen, look at I got 4 pages.
You may have to have me back.
I'm going to tell you. Are we coming up to 2 hours already? Come on, give me a minutes. Don't give me a question, then I can know what I'm.
Okay, so 2 hours would be 30 more minutes. So let's do the full 30 more minutes.
Oh yeah. Sure. Okay. What is the meaning of life?
So I have a ready-made answer to this, which doesn't seem to answer the question, but I'll tell your listeners because they might find this interesting. I have different metaphysical relations with all my children. They've each taken to different parts of what I teach. The youngest one, maybe not surprising as the youngest, has been the most attentive to my structures of thought. Uh-huh. And she really loves talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
So she went off for a year in France, and we're on WhatsApp, and she's in a conversational class, and she texts me. She says, "Daddy, we're talking about the meaning of life in my conversational French class. Quick, what's the meaning of life?"
Yeah.
Quick, because she's in class.
Now.
Yeah. So I wrote back to her, do your duty, find bliss when possible. When you can't find bliss, be resilient. And I think I wrote, and everything matters.
You did.
Yeah. She said, thank you so much. And then I said, how'd it go? She says, great. Everybody loved it. So I thought to myself, okay, now I'm kind of stuck with that. Do I believe it? I'll say it doesn't capture everything.
Yeah.
What I call meaning of life, but it captures enough in the sense that, let's say, do your duty. I'm privileging the right over the good. It's a deeply held position that the proper ends of human nature, I don't think we can properly conceive with any certainty.
Yeah.
I have a general sense of what it ought to look like.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, there are things we're supposed to do now, whatever the proper ends are.
Yeah.
So we have a duty, to carry the burden, to act morally, to sustain other people. There's all kinds of duties we have before and until we completely figure out the proper ends of human nature. Mm-hmm. Right. So doing your duty is the right over the good.
Yeah.
I have a connection with both, but I privilege the right over the good, righteousness over the violence of human nature.
Yes.
Now, find bliss. I'm taking this from Joseph Campbell. His understanding of the Jungian tradition is that aside from our basic needs as human beings, people get interested in something that brings music into their lives. Mm-hmm. So I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example. Yeah. I mean, it's my bliss. I love so many parts of it, and other people love hiking or bicycling, and that's their bliss, or smoking cigars, or Greek philosophy is a blissful place for me.
Sure.
If you don't have a bliss, there's going to be a big gap in your life. You got to find something.
Yeah. I
remember I had a high school friend, so we connect on Facebook, and the person says to me, "I make stained glass windows."
Yeah.
I thought, I knew that somebody did. It never occurred that somebody I know would.
Yeah, sure.
And the person said, "I love it."
Yeah.
Like I took a class at junior college, and I found out, and I thought, wow, there you go. Sure. The person actually makes a living making stained glass windows. Yeah. So that's what I mean by finding your bliss. Something that brings music into your life. Something that you look forward to when you're done doing your work.
Do your duty. Find your bliss when possible.
Yeah. So one of the core blisses, I believe, is in human relationships. So let's say spouse and children, something like that. Let's say spouse, children, and work probably make the core of most people. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's profoundly unfulfilling, especially when transitions are happening.
Sure.
People are changing, kids are moving in and out, those kinds of things. Sure. So people get really mad. I'm not getting my needs met. My husband, my wife, my kids, my job, I'm not getting my needs met. They get upset, they get frustrated, they get depressed. And that's where I see things crumbling.
Sure.
People have an expectation that life will provide them that meaning in an uninterrupted way.
Sure.
Or that they will provide it for themselves.
Yeah. That
they will be able to actually learn the thing they're trying to learn. And that's where resilience holding the line comes in.
Yeah.
Is that you have to say, oh, do my duty.
Yeah.
So resilience is remembering to do your duty in the gap of not getting your needs met.
Which happens all the time.
Yeah. So resilience is a great thing when you're trying to get your bliss and boom, it's not there.
Yeah.
What do I do? Well, I can get mad, get depressed, or I can just do my duty. So resilience is the cue to go back and do my duty.
Yeah.
But maybe in a new way. And everything matters. I began to really think about this when I began to studying the idea of the will.
Yeah.
And so people have trouble getting stuff done and procrastinating and so forth. It's because the will has been weakened. The will to rest, let's say, has dominated the will to get something done that needs to get done.
Yes.
So I began looking at myself and realizing I walk past a piece of trash. Mm-hmm. There's a thing that needs to be taken out from the backyard into the trash bin. Yeah. So I look around my house. Yeah. There's all kinds of little things that I know I should do, but they're so small and get away with not doing them.
Yeah.
And they're like taking a little bit too much out of my will reservoir.
Yes.
So what I learned to do is do all kinds of little things constantly.
Yeah.
And you build up the will to take care of business and not say, I don't feel like it. So, and there are some moments in life where what you do now in this particular situation will have a cascade effect.
Sure.
I'll give you one example. So I'm at a jiu-jitsu club, one of the sister schools of my school, and I'm heading out, and there's a kids class beginning. And there's a kid, the dad's there, the kid just doesn't want to train. And he says, I have a cold, I don't feel good, and the dad's getting mad at him, and the coach says to the dad, just, not here.
Yeah.
The dad takes off, the kid's there. And the senior black belt looks at me, he says, you want to give it a try? I said, sure. 10-year-old kid. I said, I'm not telling you whether to train or not, but I'm telling you there are moments in life when you don't feel like it. And in retrospect, you should have done it. It might be in college. It might be when you're married. It might be in something. And it might be that today's the day that determines what kind of person you're going to be.
Yeah.
Right. Like the moment
where push it on it.
No, I just said it might be. Look, I don't know. But if you're saying I don't feel good, therefore I won't train. This little thing matters. I said so. This might not be the day, and I'm way overstepping my bounds with you, young man. And he goes, okay. And he got on the mat.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so you never know when it matters.
Yeah.
But just assume that everything matters.
Yeah.
And And that might have the cascade effect, the ripple effect that could save the world.
Yeah.
Right? Probably not true, but you haven't hurt anybody.
I remember when you came up with that, and I had added, I said, how about everything makes a difference?
Yes, it's a good variation.
And there were two reasons for it. One, everything matters can be misinterpreted as everything matters. It could be your child died of cancer, and somebody could take that in the wrong way, where not everything should be paid attention to and be ascribed meaning. But everything makes a difference. Everything makes an impact, and everything changes the whole.
Yeah, and you never know when.
So
you might as well just assume that everything makes a difference or everything matters.
Okay. God, I had so many questions, but let's dig into it. I was thinking about recovery because that's what this podcast is partially about.
Yeah.
And what brought it to my mind, and I'm glad it happened, was I was thinking about in recovery. I think the biggest mystery, contrary to popular opinion, is the reason why addiction is so difficult to treat and such an old and cunning problem is that it gets to the heart of the question of the will. You're the only person I know that talks about will in any relevant technical way. I think psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists avoid it like the plague. They do. And there are two areas I think about a lot with addiction that I think both are not that well understood, one better than the other, which is the will, whatever that means, and let you talk about that. And the other is awareness, because as you talked about moving through your house and seeing a piece of trash, to me it implies that much of the time when we're moving around in our life, we are more or less awake and aware of what's happening. That's how we develop, how we learn, change, grow. We become more and more aware in some degree. So I'd love to hear you talk somewhat about the will, how that plays into what you do in recovery and what you think is even happening with the will in addiction. And also, if you don't mind, how that connects to awareness or your thoughts around awareness in addiction and recovery.
Okay. Yeah. So, as you know, my great entry into the conceptual world of the will happened about 1996-97 when I was teaching a class up at the former University of Judaism. I put a scheme on the board trying to describe how I saw the inner life, and the guy walked up to me and says, "So you studied Roberto Saggioli?" I said, "I've never heard of Roberto Saggioli." He says, "You're kidding me." I said, "I have never heard of Roberto Saggioli. I can guarantee you that."
Yeah.
He said, "I got to bring a book." He brings a book and shows me that a Saggioli's scheme of the inner life was identical to that which I put on the board.
Wow.
So I thought, well, then it's a natural fact, meaning people who think about things come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
So he said, "May I give you a gift?" Because I have several copies of the book. I guess he had also several copies, so he handed me a copy. And I read it. And what it reminded me of when I was a much younger person, I had a sports car called an MG. It's a British, British little thing, and it was acting up. I took it up to the mechanic, and he said, "I want you to know the manual for this car is actually unintelligible."
Okay.
So I want to walk you through what's happening with your car.
Sure.
And the amount of concentration it took to figure out this turgid language to fix this carburetor was a real victory of the will.
Yeah.
I'm reading Saggioli, and I think to myself, this guy figured out the carburetor.
Wow.
This is so technical that he actually understands how to get fuel from here to there in the proper proportion.
Wow.
And I thought, he's the first guy that's talking about it in a way that describes how the thing works.
Yeah.
Not, we should all have the will, and let's have the will. And I read it through and through, and I outlined the book, and I began teaching from it. I would say for probably a good 5-7 years of my life, I just kept teaching a Saggioli one way or the other. Even when I didn't say I was teaching a Saggioli, I was teaching a Saggioli.
Sure.
So he brought me into this idea that what has many forces in the ego self, contrary forces, feelings, emotions, drives, impulses, sensations, intuitions, thoughts, and so forth. They're all in the ego self, with their own patterns, vying for what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So, for example, a person says to me, I'm having a bad feeling about this. I said, okay, that's a feeling that said to the will, I'm taking over from this point. So, but what do you think about what's going on? Now, what do you feel? What do you think?
Yeah.
And what do you know?
Yeah.
So people realize, I feel one thing.
Yeah.
I think something else. I know something else.
Yeah.
And that introduces them to the way we experience the world means something in the inner self was victorious in capturing our attention.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
And so why are you, people say, I operate on my feelings. I say, why are you allowing that one thing of the 6 things of the inner life? Why are you giving that one privilege? Does it always work for you?
Yeah.
No. I said, well, then why are you trusting it? Well, aren't we supposed to trust our feelings? I said, I don't trust my feelings. I don't know about you, but I think my feelings are.
You trust that they're real.
Yeah, they're real, but I never trust that they're right.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're telling you what to do.
Yeah, they are telling me what to do.
Yeah.
But I never let them counsel me.
Yeah.
I said, you talk, but you can't counsel me. You just kind of leave me where you're there.
Yeah.
Because I think better than I feel.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting thing to figure out.
Yeah.
Like,
do you think other people are the other way? That some people feel better than they think?
I absolutely. Yeah. Some people think themselves in the wrong thing every single time. Yeah. It's amazing.
You got to go with your conscience.
There you go. And they're bad about it. So what I say is, which has the best track record of producing success in its practical reality?
I love it.
Right? I said, what happens when you operate on your feelings? It goes badly. Yeah. What can you trust? My intuitions. I said, great. So you understand the distinction between a feeling and intuition. You go, yeah. I said, follow your intuition, see how that goes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And then people are like, well, I intuit. I said, how's that going for you?
Yeah.
So what Asaj Yoga taught me is there's a kind of a combat going on in the realm of the ego self.
Yeah.
And then there's a pattern of this combat.
Yeah.
Something then arises to capture the will in the ego mind as this is the right thing to do when it's never been verified.
Yeah.
So this idea that higher consciousness can manage the will and higher consciousness can evaluate all the options and all that stuff's going on there and come to a conclusion and then enlist the will in what the higher self has decided.
Is there a difference for you when you say higher consciousness or higher self from observer mind or observer self? Is there a difference between those two?
No, observer mind is the bottom level of the higher self. The first skill of the higher self is to observe what's happening and disidentify from it.
Okay.
That's level 1. Level 2 is other people are having experiences at the same time I am. It sounds obvious, but your ego self does not operate that way. I call it the objective mind.
Okay.
I'm one of many stakeholders.
Observer mind, objective, not subjective.
Exactly. Is the next mind.
Keeps going.
Above that, I would say, is the reasoning mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I have a world of facts, including the facts about other people, can I produce a theory based on what I have observed? Okay, so then there's the reasoning mind.
Which also has to do with being able to articulate it to yourself in some way, right?
Sure,
that's one of the great challenges that I often think. I'm okay with language, or in regular company, I'm good with language. But I think about how difficult it must be for somebody who has all of this going on internally, but has a really difficult time articulating in language to themselves, because you need language.
Yes, you do.
To articulate.
This level of the higher self requires precision in language.
Yeah.
So after I observe, after I'm objective, I need linguistic skills. And that's why I so profoundly believe that precision in language is the best tool to get through the thicket.
Yeah.
If you don't have that. So I'm very particular, because if one interprets the facts incorrectly or has a bad theory, what's going to happen next is not going to be good.
Yeah.
And people say, well, how do you do that? I said, it's called practice, training. It's difficult. I said, welcome to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. What is well, I want to bring it back to addiction and recovery and give you a minute on that, but what is the will?
Okay, so you might say the will is this mysterious force that translates the unconscious world into action.
Is it you? Are you your will?
Very good. So now we get to the deeper metaphysical level. It's one of those things, like the good, the right, and the true, that cannot be defined without involving other things that need to be defined. So there, at the final level, there's a realm that involves unidentifiable undefinable words that exist as a constellation.
Okay.
So to aim at this one,
Yes.
you have to aim at that one. So they exist in a constellation.
You can only, like language, you can only, a word only means something in connection to the system of words
Yes.
and the reality that it's interacting in.
So oftentimes when a person says to me, well, if you're saying that higher consciousness decides what to will into the world, isn't that the will of the higher consciousness? I said, you arrived at the constellation.
Yeah.
And that's mysterious.
Yes, it is.
That's where I said, let's go ahead and agree that you've touched on mystical reality,
Yeah.
but don't let it paralyze you. When you get down to the realm where the right, the true, the good, when it all exists in a constellation, you've gotten as far as you're going to get with conscious thinking. And that's a good place to get,
Yeah.
because if you sit there, you arrive into some kind of authenticity.
Yeah.
Authenticity lives in there.
Yeah, interesting.
And then you can, as it were, will yourself into the world.
I can't wait to watch this. Go back, write 50 questions, and do it again.
All right.
But we're not done. We're not done.
Okay.
So the relations. So I, working in substance abuse treatment forever, and hearing all of the critiques about treatment, I try to explain to people that the challenge of treatment is that you're dealing with the challenge of the will. I mean, there are bad treatment centers. There are people who don't think well. There's all of this stuff that goes on. But I say it's much like a nutritionist or a personal trainer.
Correct.
If the person cannot activate the will, not perfectly, but imperfectly, then you can't do the work.
Correct.
And so how do you see the will in relationship to addiction?
It is the only thing that matters in my mind. Because ultimately, addiction is an extreme version of the desire to feel good.
Yeah.
Which is one of the deepest, most authentic drives in a human being is to feel good.
Yes.
Now, so why do people choose to suffer? Because there's a higher good beyond the immediate good.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll suffer because the pleasure of being fit is greater than the chocolate.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I use the word pleasure, but yes.
Whatever
what it means to me.
Yeah. Whatever it calls to walk around fit.
Yeah.
Feels great.
Yeah.
Man, it feels great. So I look at the bad food and I say, well, I got a choice to make. Fit or
chocolate cake.
Yeah. And I try to choose fit enough that I never get fundamentally out of shape.
Yeah.
Okay. So the will, therefore, is the moment when you decide on something other than feeling good.
Yes.
Something greater.
Yes. Which would you, sorry to interrupt.
Sure, no problem.
That's why I always say there has to be a certain level of awareness. And I don't just mean, knowing what's going on, but I mean pulling out of the self and being able to see something like a glimpse of the moral spiritual landscape, something that gives you a vision beyond the feel good. So there has to be a level of awareness there.
Very good. So here's where the good is more important than the right.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
This is a precise moment when the nihilistic sense of it's not going to get better. There is no good because I've been defeated.
Yes.
I'm never going to get enough love. I'm never going to get enough whatever they're after.
Yeah. And
they just want to, as the Titanic sinks, I just want to feel good. So therefore, I say the recovery of the will, I say to the guys I work with, there's a slim moment right before using where the ego self says, this is the only rational answer is to use because I feel so bad.
Yes.
Take one step back from that and recover the free will to choose that or something else. Yeah. You say, what's the something else? I said, bingo.
Yeah.
Let's discuss the something else. And Shai, people's faces light up. So we have a guy that we both know, I won't say his name, who feels defeated.
Yeah.
College, work's kind of not working out.
Yeah.
And I said, the only thing you need to do is, in the context of, a moral, virtuous life, is produce some good for somebody else. Minimally, that's what you're doing here.
Yeah.
So if you have to live in a little hovel and eat rice and beans 3 times a day, that's what it takes for you. So forget about college, forget about work, forget about wealth. You ask yourself, what's one thing I can do for another person, and how much do I need to make for my hovel and my rice and beans 3 times a day? That's your only question. Because you can produce good for some other human being. You're not on this ship alone. This ship is not sinking. You have crewmates, and somebody needs something from you. And just meditating, I don't have to have a job. I don't have to go to college. I just have to produce some good for somebody else.
Who do I want to be in the world, aside from my career, aside from what I call the window dressing?
And you might land on a job or college.
Usually.
And what happens is the existential dread of failure goes away. Because the guys we're dealing with, every single one of them can empty bedpans.
100%.
Every single one of them.
Walking a woman across the street.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever. So I call it the recovery of the will to what I call the will to medicate, because I don't feel good, as opposed the will to service. The will to service, I think, the person, and then all kinds of things that come from it. So, the recovery of the will is the step right before using, and recover that sliver of time, and whatever it takes to will the good over the pleasurable.
All right, 2 more questions.
Okay.
I'm being mindful. We have 6 minutes. The last one's just a fun one.
Okay.
So you've worked more in the addiction, alcoholism, recovery field now, the last, must be 2.5 years now.
Going on 3 years.
Than probably what you did before combined.
Correct.
I guess.
Yes.
And so coming into this field with a lot of background on human nature and all of what you shared, what kind of surprised you in working with people suffering from addictions?
2 things. Number 1 is it has completely affirmed what I think. Because the test is pragmatic. Do people tell me it helps in recovery? Now, this is life or death stuff. So for people to say to me, what you do addresses precisely, because one of my favorite working was, I don't know about recovery, and I don't know the literature, and I don't have the 12 steps memorized, and you said just get started. What I realize is what I'm doing is perfect for these guys. That surprised me. That maybe recovery is something to learn from me. And I don't need to learn the recovery field because I'm doing okay here. You gave me a job. You gave me you and Emily gave me the opportunity to do something really meaningful and magnificent and of service to people in an immediate sense. It's a great thing. A lot of people don't have that. But today, I actually made a tangible, measurable difference in somebody else's life. That's an incredible honor to have. So that. The second thing is, a lot of these guys are like tattooed tough guys. And that every single one of them has needs for approval.
People pleasers.
They're people pleasers. And you'd never think that. Tattooed, violent drug addict. They all are pleasers. I went, wow. That's like, I'm stunned because I thought predators. They're not predators. They're pleasers. There might be a predator here and there. But
there's diversity. But if you were to, when people ask me, and I have a lot of videos on this, what are the sort of, because there's such diversity, what are the universal qualities that you see to try to understand typology in some way? And I'm going to say over-accommodation. I said probably the most common.
Isn't that crazy?
Which isn't that crazy if you think about it, because over-accommodation is developmentally appropriate it's not over-accommodation, it's accommodation in adolescence between the ages of 13 and 17, when often you're getting sucked into your peers' stuff and their approval is more important than the cost to yourself, and you don't see yourself systems-wide. The reason why that I think is that's when a lot of people get stuck. They get stuck at that place in development. They begin to medicate at that point, and they don't get over it. They don't recover it. Then they're 30, 40, whatever.
It's very well articulated.
So I did want to reflect, what you said, and I wanted to validate that maybe it's not as much about what I need to learn from people in recovery. Maybe all of the work I've done and philosophy I've developed, recovery has a lot to learn from it. And I want to validate that in you working with 180 people now that have gone through here, and on every outcome measure, every single person who has sat in a group or worked with you individually, I mean, what you bring is incredibly powerful and transformative. and also something that's they don't get, they don't hear. And I think that has to do with who you are and your background, and also Misogyoli and the will. And so one of the reasons why we're doing this is this narrative needs to be put out there. This is an important narrative. My last question.
Sure.
This comes from Alan Watts.
Alan Watts, okay.
You like Alan?
Yeah.
Okay. So he calls it the throne room of God. So you're in the throne room of the metaconscious personal God.
Okay.
You've been listening to Dope Wisdom with Yeshaia Blakeney. To learn more about the resources mentioned on this show, or to listen to past episodes, visit www.recoverintegrity.com/Dope Wisdom Podcast. I appreciate y'all out there. Blessings.